right, guys. Welcome to Owlcast episode 11. I'm here with Grant Baum, co-hosting with me today, Will Robertson and Liza Turchinsky. Sorry about that. So today we're going to have a slightly different format for an episode. We're going to actually, we have two very well-informed, sorry if I flattered you guys too much, very well-informed Foothill students. And we're just going to be talking about some current events, relevant historical events that you guys want to talk about, and anything that can merit a good discussion. So we have a nice little word bank up there, word cloud up there. So let's see. Let's start with the Venezuelan crisis. So first off, where are you guys getting your news for such a crisis like this? Where'd you guys first hear about this?
So do you want to start off, or?
Yeah, sure. So I personally am going to be straight up and say that that's not one of the main issues that I'm following. There's so many political things happening right now. It's hard to pick your priorities, and I only know about that conflict on a very surface level. So it's things that I read on headlines when I get my New York Times and Washington Post notifications every day, and what I listen to on NPR in the car. But outside of that, I haven't done any specific research.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think what it's really about is if you hear something on the news or just in your life, what I typically do is oh, that sounds interesting, I'm going to learn more about that. So I kind of just I heard about the Venezuelan crisis when it first started around 2014-ish, and I was oh, I want to learn more about that. So I just Googled it, literally, and I hit up some trusted websites that I knew had good content on it. And I just kind of read that and made reading that part of this kind of consistent thing that I did over the years. Every once in a while, whenever news from Venezuela came out, I heard news from Venezuela, that means that I would then go to this trusted website and read it. And typically, I would read stuff from the Brookings Institution, which is a think tank in Washington. I would read stuff from Foreign Affairs, which is a magazine dealing with foreign affairs, and BBC, of course, New York Times, stuff like that. I would say that the most important thing is to make sure that wherever you're getting your news, make sure that it is not only good quality, but make sure that you are aware of what the bias is. So I understand that most of the stuff that I'm reading has a fairly liberal bias, and that just takes kind of a certain level of being aware of stuff and talking with people about the stuff that you're reading to make sure that the stuff that you're reading kind of check to kind of get other people's impressions of what you're reading, and then that'll help you kind of interpret what the bias is.
So you're taking things with a grain of salt, kind of?
Not necessarily, but at the very least being very skeptical.
Yeah.
Being very skeptical of your reading, not trusting everything that you read, and doing a little bit of your own fact checking, or even just common sense tests.
Do you think being aware of the bias is enough, or are you subscribing to the philosophy that you should read news from a political spectrum to get the full picture?
I honestly in an ideal world you would read everything about a topic, but honestly average person just can't do that. I can't do that, and I'm this is kind of how I spend my time, and I can't do that. Or at least I can, but I choose not to.
I mean, there's probably time crunch.
Yeah, there have been research studies that show even people who are very, very well informed about stuff, they still choose to remain within their bubbles and within their own kind of news line, and that's dangerous. But I don't know how to.
Is it? Do you think it's not because you don't want to? It's more because for practical purposes.
I mean, there's certainly both. For if you're just an average person who has other shit to care about, fine, that's totally valid. Of course, you don't need to stay ahead of everything, and you should just rely on just a few sources. So what matters most is making sure that those sources are then credible and fairly neutral.
Yeah, and I almost feel it's more comfortable to stay within your ideological bias when you're reading news. I know when I'm listening to NPR in the car, it's pleasant and it plays to what I already agree with, and I like hearing what I agree with, even though I try to understand many perspectives. I always fall into choosing news that I already implicitly agree with, and being aware of that and understanding that you're choosing news for a specific purpose and that it plays a part in your understanding of the world, and each author has a bias, and the organization itself has a bias, and the media conglomerate has a bias too. I think having that knowledge when you're reading an article and not taking it at face value And if you have enough time, reading other articles from different news sources that you wouldn't usually go to, or at least having different perspectives in your friend circles or in your professional life. I think that's the best way to really get to know a topic, is to get to know a person. Mm-hmm. They can tell you a lot more than 1,000 words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think like as you're like formulating your own opinions about your the world around us, I think it's totally okay. I think and understandable that you're like choosing the different things that you align with. That's like kind of comforting too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know I recently saw a video on Facebook, I think, of a police tank like running into a crowd in Venezuela. I don't know if you guys saw the same thing, but I don't know much about the crisis either. I definitely just know it from like a surface level stance, from like headlines, from videos like that. And I'm definitely not skeptical enough when I see things like that. As soon as I saw that, my first reaction was like, wow, this is terrible. The government is like doing something wrong, but I don't know the whole picture. Yeah, and maybe that was a good assumption, but how do you guys? Yeah, so I guess how do you guys balance? How do you guys apply that skepticism and actually like rather than just being skeptical, like do you actually delve deeper into multiple sides of the story, or you're just having that skeptic's mindset when you're reading things?
I mean, I think when you go into anything, you in order to sort all the information that you're dealing with, you have to have some sort of framework to kind of sort that and make sense of stuff. So my framework going into stuff is to say, if I look at that tank video, I don't like. I immediately think of the crisis, and I immediately think, okay, this is a situation, and it's more, and the fact that the situation is horrible and the fact that it's very, very a huge mess isn't necessarily like the direct fault of any one individual. Mm-hmm. So it's the fact that there is a very, very oppressive regime, plus you have a very, very horrible economy at the moment, plus you have an opposition that is simply not willing to sit down and talk with the president. And so that means that the only really way that the opposition can make their voices heard are through very, very tough and persistent protests. And the only way that the president can kind of combat that is through police reaction, because he does not have a popular base anymore. It's basically vanished.
Yeah.
Like Erdogan, he could pull in counter protesters, and that's typically his strategy. Because he did have a base of support, instead of resorting just to police brutality. But the point is, like, when you look at this, you don't think, oh, it's it's entirely the fault of this horrible dictator, and if we just removed him, like, it'll all be better. The fundamental problem is that nobody is at fault and everybody is at fault. So it's just basically it's just a mess, and don't go into things like trying to find one cause or one piece to blame. It like everybody is at fault in that situation.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like understanding the complexity of a situation. It's not like black and white. You can't just take one side. Really.
Yeah, go into it like not looking for an answer. Just go into it looking for information. Like I don't fully understand the crisis myself, and I know therefore that I do not have a solution to it. And I know that I never will. And so I'm very skeptical whenever I read even very intelligent people who are saying, "Oh, this is what you need to do to solve the crisis." Other than that, like go into stuff humbly. I think having a very humble attitude when you read the news is most important.
Yeah. Okay, that's some really good advice. Then like transitioning to some more like domestic and local issues that Liza you're interested in. I know you're part of the Social Justice Club, formerly known as Use Your Voices here at Foothill. So what are some of the projects that you guys are currently working on?
Yeah, sure. So one of the biggest projects that we did last quarter is with the organization that I currently work for, the ACLU. And that was their March 14th resistance training live stream. And that was just a big organizational gathering in Miami, and we live streamed it to the Foothill students here on campus in one of the big auditorium rooms, and we actually had around 100 people, so that was a really great turnout. And that was really focused on educating people about what it means to protest, how to do it civilly, and how to do it productively. Because, going out into the streets with signs and screaming it's great, and it's the first step, and it's, you're angry, there's an event that just happened, and you need to express yourself, you need your community. But the next step is, what do we do now? Now that we've organized as a community, what are the actionable steps we can take to make sure that either doesn't happen or a change that we would like to see does? And that was the purpose of that event, is to gather all these people that are feeling this shared sense of communion or anger or fear and organize towards the next step. So after that event that we had on campus, the ACLU formed into a grassroots organization called People Power. And I'm currently working with them as the Santa Clara County coordinator. And I could go into that, but that's just really the next step of the resistance as I see it right now. It's, express yourself, join a community, find something to do. It's not enough to just be on the streets. That shows public support, but that's not what gets things done. It's better to be the person who's making decisions than the person who's reacting to them.
So from where you are, do you think that this is like a fairly powerful nationwide phenomenon? Do you think that the grassroots is going to have, like a lot of people are saying, there's going to be a Tea Party of the left? Do you see that happening, or do you think it's positive?
Well, Tea Party, the Indivisible Guide was written by people who were seeing the Tea Party movement.
Wait, what is the Indivisible?
The Indivisible Guide was written by a few ex-congressional staffers, and it was written how to disrupt the government, how the Tea Party worked its way into the last administration, and using those tactics and applying it to the resistance. And that was just a very in-depth guide about how politics works, how to best contact your representative, how to create local change, and really drawing on the disruptive nature of the Tea Party and implementing that for what we now see as important. So, and yes, I think that is an effective strategy. It's just a matter of getting the right amount of people together and doing it strategically. If you have a bunch of people focusing on one issue and it's just, a million people trying to do the same thing, although that's good in numbers, you have to be strategic, and you can't have everyone working on the exact same thing. So I think now is just, when forming a team, it's, storming, forming. We're definitely in the forming process right now. It's still very new. I think that the resistance itself and the activism is really uncharted. I also work for Women's March San Francisco, and that was, the largest protest in U.S. history. And that really says something that happened right after the inauguration. And with all of these things, it's really drawing people out of the woodworks, people who maybe were dormant in politics, worked in politics during the civil rights movement, have been dormant for a while, now being active again, or people who never were interested in politics or had nothing to do with activism now feel this sense of urge and necessity to act now.
Do you think like the special elections that are coming up, I think in Montana and like Georgia, right?
Yeah, John Ossoff.
So yeah, John Ossoff ran. Now he's in a runoff. Do you see that this is going to like play a very strong force in the runoff? Like, do you think that the
resistance?
Well, these grassroots movements, do you feel like they will have a major impact and actually turn some seats in special elections?
I think so. Yeah, Indivisible is very good at doing direct action to the congressmen and the people who are making decisions and keeping them accountable. So as Indivisible was starting, there's this app that they use now called Amplify. There's also 5 calls, and that it gives you an agenda to call your congressman or senator about every week, and they've been saying that there's thousands of people calling them now. Whereas it was probably only a few worried constituents about a specific problem. Now it's easy. It's on Facebook. It's everywhere. You know exactly who to contact about what.
Those calls go directly to the congressman? Do they pick up and everything, or they have
sometimes it's to the staffer, sometimes it's to the city manager or wherever you're calling, but
it just makes it easier, lowers the
and they are aware of it, and people are showing up to town halls, and I do really believe that politics is local, and engaging in your rights as a citizen of this country and as a participant in our experiment and our social contract, if you utilize those rights, you will get the representation that you're looking for.
It's interesting because I feel like like an app like that, what was it called again?
There's Amplify. And also 5 calls.
Okay, and so that just like you use the app to call your congressman about an issue. And so, okay, and then there's obviously like a huge social media presence. There's a lot of people going to town halls and stuff. My main worry about that is that like if this becomes a normalized thing, if this becomes a regular thing, then that'll dilute the impact of those types of actions. And so I simply feel that like while all this action is really, really great, and like that is the way for the people to influence policy, is to actually like get out there and act. I do feel that in order for it to be like actually impactful, the Democrats kind of need to get their act together and say, okay, this is the issue that we're going to protest. This is what we need to talk about most. And obviously that needs to be informed by the grassroots movement and like how passionate they are about other issues and stuff.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I think it would be great if we had one centralized purpose, but it's just, you know, we all wake up and we see our news notifications and we have to see what's under attack today and what's going down.
Yeah, I mean, like, Democrats have always been like a big tent party. They've always like tried to let in everybody, and that's kind of loosened kind of the party coherence. Like, you know, the famous quote is like, oh, Democrats want to fall in love, Republicans want to fall in line. Like, it's very much true. Like, Democrats want to have everything because they're a kind of a big tent party, and they have to have everything in order to appease all the groups of it.
And when we have direct opposition to that in both parties, in both chambers of Congress and the administration, it makes it very difficult to focus on one specific issue. When we're including so many groups and demographics and issues that we're following, like, you know, it feels like every demographic right now has some sort of concerning thing that's coming down from the government. So it's very difficult to find one cohesive thing to focus on, and that's why there are so many different groups, organizations, nonprofits working on specific issues, and it's just impossible for myself or for anyone to focus specifically on one thing and ignore everything else. It's difficult.
Yeah. Do you feel like the Democrats do have a messaging problem? Because, like, a lot of the issues that they're bringing up at these marches is March for Science, you know, Women's March, healthcare. Most of those issues are not, like, the number 2, 3 priority for most Americans, which routinely are education, economics, and terrorism.
Yeah.
So do you feel like it just isn't going to appeal to most people, and like we're just rallying, getting the left really, really angry and not actually reaching out beyond the base?
Well, I think that's twofold. First of all, I think the reason those marches were so successful is because they weren't labeled as partisan. So Women's March, March for Science, that's not a partisan issue. Everyone can be for women's rights. Everyone can be promoting science and technology. You don't need to be aligning with a specific party to be promoting that. And there were actually a lot of people, maybe not a lot, but some Republicans at both of those events that I saw. So I think that's the publicity aspect of it. Giving it a general label like that is much more effective. And, you know, a march for market growth is probably going to...
March for full employment. Actually, no, those are marches.
It's a different kind of marches.
I'm sure unions organize things like that all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. I think there's a march for farmers recently. Mm-hmm. But I sure they weren't partisan, but I think, you know, it's very easy for it to be seen by the media as partisan, and like I think the media did in fact like label it as a very, very partisan moment, and then certainly like Donald Trump's reaction to it in the way that the left played up the marches, like, oh, look at our inauguration numbers versus
it was definitely
versus the march numbers.
It was definitely reactionary. Like the Women's March and the Science March would not have been happening a year ago.
Right.
I mean, these are always continuing issues.
So doesn't that make it partisan?
I think they're reactionary to one individual, especially. Yeah. I don't even think. Yeah.
Sure, but that individual now has a brand. He is the head of the Republican Party, so like it has to be partisan if it's in a very political context. So my main worry is that
I'm sure people were labeling it as partisans. Those who wanted to use that as like leverage. So maybe those in the DRC were probably labeling it as partisan.
Sure, and like the problem with that is that then those issues become partisan, and then it becomes impossible for Republicans to support women's rights, for example.
It's just like a constant tug of war between different interests and like how they're like which lens they're looking at these different movements from. I think
this is what happened with climate change. Like this happened with climate change. Like it wasn't partisan before people made it partisan, and then no Republican can be caught.
I feel like things are always going to be made partisan then. Yeah.
I mean that's how it is.
Yeah.
But that brings me to the point I was talking about earlier, that marches are great and reaching out to people in that way is great, but policy planning and actual change is better. And when you're focusing on, you know, this general topic of women's issues or Planned Parenthood, this very controversial on both sides. When you take that apart and really focus on the specific initiatives that Planned Parenthood is focusing on and the specific things that they need funding for, it becomes much less partisan, and it becomes a lot easier to navigate the political trial and error and the different organizations or different structures that need be for that to pass or not pass. So labeling something like Women's March or March for Science is good because it brings community, but at the same time it does make it partisan, and it's not as impactful as actually creating a policy. But then again, you have to consider what are people thinking about when they see a policy or when they see a candidate. We would like to imagine that, you know, they're creating a very factual cost-benefit analysis of voting for something or voting for a particular candidate, but that's not always the case. It's more emotion-based. It's first impressions. Most people don't, and even people who follow the news, I know that I do this myself also. I make very rash, quick first impressions, depending on where I get my news from, who's saying it, who's involved. And that's really what's guiding my decision-making and my thought process when I'm thinking about a political issue.
I think we all do that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I say, like, whenever I read the news, be humble about it. Make sure that always kind of slow down when you're reading the news or listening to it or whatever.
Yeah, definitely slow down is a good
yeah.
But taking the partisan aspect of those issues and understanding that both Republicans, Democrats, Independents, really anyone, are all working towards the same goal, just with different strategies. So then focusing on understanding and educating yourself about the specific strategy rather than the person who's representing it or all of the politics and the emotion behind it is really, I feel, the only way to collaborate both parties together get anything done.
I mean, I think if ordinary voters suddenly en masse going out and educating themselves about basic issues, I think if that were the only way to make real change, then we're all screwed. Like, because that's never going to happen.
But
and that's
isn't that
always
what's happening now?
No, I don't think so. I think that certainly Democrats are getting a whole lot more knowledgeable about the constitutional system, at least the ones who care. But I don't think that they are getting. I don't think that they're using that to then get more knowledgeable in general.
Keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, for example, like, Democrats know a whole lot about how committees are formed in Congress, right? And they know the responsibilities of the oversight committee. I don't think that their knowledge now extends beyond that, and I don't think that necessarily knowing how a committee works makes you better able to decide who should be president.
Yeah, and I think people will educate themselves about issues that matter to their party and to their what is pertaining to them. So if you're a Democrat, you want to learn about issues and how the committees work for, like, healthcare and education. But if you're a Republican, you want to learn more about state rights and all of the different types of federalism and all of that. And I think you can get educated on the specific issues, but we need more holistic education about the general policy making and general.
Sure, but I mean, maybe this might be controversial, but, like, I don't necessarily think that people should absolutely be aware about issues that affect them. I don't necessarily think that it's a solution to democracy to simply just make everybody more educated about politics.
Yeah.
Like, my mother, for example, bless her heart, couldn't care less about anything that's going on outside of her room, and that's completely fine. Like, I don't think that we should then, like, I don't think we should say to those people, you have to care about this. I don't think that we should say that for the sake of democracy, you need to be more aware of stuff. I think that there are other solutions that can be made to kind of nudge people into simply that nudge politicians into kind of supporting just better policy.
Well, and I think that's why we don't have any, at least right now, any sort of education or litmus test for voting. Like, anyone can vote, any citizen can vote and participate in that, no matter if they're educated in the political system or not. And we can't take away partisanship. That will always be there, and you'll always be interested in the issues that pertain to you and your demographic. That's just always how it will be. But I think understanding not necessarily the way that government works, but being more of a critical reader or critical analyst of the news that you're getting and where you're getting it from and how the greater system of it works is important, and that will give you a better relationship with the world and politics and other people around you, and it's just a domino effect. The more you are accepting, the more information you'll learn and accept.
Yeah, but, like, I mean, this is just a bunch of poli-sci majors talking about how you should care about politics more. I mean, this isn't like
not politics, just what's going on, right?
Yeah, okay, what's going on in the world. But, like, I mean, the point is, like, everybody who cares about this one thing will say, like, everybody needs to pay more attention to my stuff because my stuff is important.
But that's the thing. It doesn't have to be your stuff. It just has to be the general awareness of how news or how politics work. Like, I don't want people necessarily to be interested or needing to educate themselves on healthcare. I just want people to be aware of what a vote means.
Right.
And
I'm not talking about issues per se. I'm just talking about, like, I don't necessarily think that people should should make it a life goal or a priority to be more educated about the world around them. Or like
you don't think they should make it a priority to be more aware? That's a very controversial statement.
In the arena of politics and world events, because I mean, my mother's this way very much. Like, she doesn't care less, and you know what? She has to focus her resources and her time on stuff that's more important to her life directly. I think that,
but do you think she's limiting her potential?
No, not at all. Like, we all have limited time, and we need to prioritize how we spend it best. I think that, like, for example, you're a comp sci major, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
comp sci and probably philosophy too. So I'm not just STEM,
nice.
Okay?
Yeah, no, of course. But like, if you spent more of your time like in comp sci and STEM, I'm not saying than you do now. I'm just saying in general. Then you would be better at that, and probably.
I actually completely disagree, and I've actually been through a STEM school.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually on the East Coast.
Yeah,
you're right. And I was told I felt like I was not becoming, I was not reaching my full potential because of those things, and now I'm actually transferring to a liberal arts school, which I'm completely stoked about, because I do feel like there are areas of my education that are just completely lacking. Like, I don't feel very aware. I don't feel very creative. I feel like. That's why I'm doing this whole journalism thing. I'm really working on expressing myself.
But my point is like that's your choice. That I'm saying, like, that's your choice.
Like, and I do think
I'm saying a lot of people simply don't care, and if they don't care, then they probably shouldn't care.
Yeah. Yeah, they might not care, but I do think that it can be kind of limiting if they don't even give it a chance. I mean, it might not work for everyone, right? Some people want to be experts in their field, but I think. Yeah.
I mean, I've known a lot of people who, like, again, they don't care, and as soon as Donald Trump hit the news, they're like, oh, I have to care about this because Donald Trump is a giant, monster threat, and then their lives just kind of went to crap because they didn't, because they approached it from a base where they didn't really have a grounding, and they were just completely lost with all the information.
I mean, not everyone is going to be deeply interested in political theory or philosophy. And
I'm not even talking about that.
I know, but what you were saying about the whole, like, I think it's more important for people to have a whole understanding than a specific understanding of politics or even how a specific issue works. Yeah. Having a whole understanding and bringing all the different things that you're specifically interested in, whether it's a political issue or your skills, like if you're a computer science major, and bringing what you know about computer science and having that be a basis that you build and you experience the whole rest of your world around, but having a whole understanding and not just focusing on that specific thing, not being an expert in all of those things necessarily, but I feel like whenever I take a class, I think about and use the things that I learned in that class onwards for subjects that are completely not even relevant to that. Yeah. So, like, using the logic from computer science for social science, and you can apply that in politics by learning about specific issues or general civics, and you don't need to be an expert, or you don't even need to be very interested in politics to be a global citizen and holistic and understanding how cultures work. And I think that's really the driving force. It's not as important to be educated on every policy of a party as it is to be educated on that there's more than one perspective. Yeah,
I think just being open, exactly. I think you hit that spot on. You don't necessarily have to be an expert. You don't have to write research papers about political philosophy.
Sure, but that's not really what I'm saying. Like,
what are you saying?
What I'm more saying is, like,
that some people don't care, and that we shouldn't rely on that.
That,
the
like,
fact
no,
that
that
go out
a
there
lot,
and try to become more
not
aware.
just some, like, a lot of people don't care.
Yeah.
And
okay.
that maybe,
That's what you're saying, yeah.
I mean, maybe, like, the vast majority of political and current events issues, they do not affect them. Like, you can, like, take a look at the stuff up there, like, none of it really directly impacts you. And if you don't care about that because of that, I think that's totally fine.
I think there's a lot of, like, themes that are very universal between these things, or different insights that you can pick up from those specific
absolutely.
events
like,
that will definitely apply to you.
Yeah, but like if, for example, you were much more into, like, arts, books, literature, music, that sort of stuff, and all of that, like, that does kind of educate you about life and the universe and everything. But like, if that's kind of what you focus on, sure, go ahead and, like, focus on that, and, like, that makes you a more well-rounded person.
Yeah, and
those are a lot of subjects there, so I like that. So that is still, like, cross-disciplinary.
Yeah, no, I'm not against a general education.
Yeah.
Like, this is America. Come on. I mean, we're better than Europe for a reason.
That I agree with that. And it doesn't. That's what I was saying. That it doesn't have to be about politics. You just should be globally aware in whatever interest foundation you have. Making yourself globally aware for the things that you're specifically interested in, and being aware that there's other things around you. But a follow-up question to that is, what do you say about people who choose not to vote?
That's fine. Yeah.
Or maybe people who chose not to vote in this election and then are mad about it.
So I think there are a lot of reasons why people choose not to vote to the extent that it is a choice.
Yeah, that's true. Some people.
Yeah, like. Okay, so as you know, like voting is a really, really complicated issue, and like the reasons why people don't vote are myriad. Mm-hmm. But people who like didn't vote and then choose to be angry about it.
Yeah.
Fine, like you're entitled to be angry, if you really think that that's the point you want to live your life. Sure, go ahead and be angry, but just recognize that you're not powerless in that situation, and that the fact that you're using your voice now, it doesn't make up for the fact that you didn't try to make a change earlier when you could have actually influenced the election. But the fact that you're using your voice now, go ahead, do that. Good for you. I'm not using my voice. Like I don't like ever really talk about politics outside of my close friends. So yeah, go ahead and be active and like tell people why you're angry about this particular issue. But in terms of voting, like the voting system is just so beyond screwed up that the reason why some person doesn't vote isn't necessarily linked to their political engagement.
Is there a solution outside of changing the voting system and all of the different alternatives that there are for specifically engaging those people who are apathetic but they don't care enough to vote, and then later on they get angry about things that they could have had a say in? Is there a solution or any sort of way to get them involved, and what would make them interested, in your opinion?
I mean, I think there are a lot of ways to do that. One of the ways is compulsory voting, making it against the law to not vote. I think that might be a constitutional issue in America that might go against the First Amendment a little bit, but otherwise, you can lower the voting age. You can extend you can extend early voting. You can introduce it to more states. You can have online voting, which Estonia has because they're awesome. You can have you can move voting to a Sunday.
Oh, yeah. That's a ridiculous story.
Yeah.
Why it's on Tuesday?
Yeah, like I thought it was in the Constitution for a long time.
So the reason it's on a Tuesday is because in the 1800s, farmers needed to travel by horse-drawn carriage into the city, and they didn't want to interrupt the Sabbath or market day, which is on Wednesday, and they needed a full day to get in their little wheelbarrows and travel to the voting booths, and it's just been that way on a Tuesday since then, which a lot of people agree is completely ridiculous, because in most other industrialized democracies, it's a national holiday. Although in most states you can take time off to work, you're not making money during that time, and some people can't afford to do that. In some states' constitutions, it's not even illegal for your employer to deny you of that. So most other industrialized democracies have it as a voting day on a Friday or a weekend where everyone can come and vote, and there's no barrier.
I feel like we have a lot of like relics from the olden times that are just like still stuck in our system that we need to like flush out.
I mean, to an extent, it's kind of designed to work that way because the constitutional framers, I mean, they were a pretty conservative bunch by our standards. They didn't want a whole lot of sudden changes, and so the fact that we do have all those relics is just a symptom of the fact that we have a system designed to prevent sudden changes. Obviously, a lot of stuff is going to get left over.
Yeah,
like I think Connecticut, like just a couple of years ago, they went through all of their laws for the past 300 years, and they found some really weird stuff in there, like thou shalt not pet a goose on Sundays or whatever. They just said, okay, what's silly? What should we keep? What should we throw out? Britain just did a thing recently similar to that. There was a law that they found that made it illegal for someone to wear a suit of armor into the Parliament building, and so they had to throw that law out. So every once in a while, you kind of need to do that, and we just haven't really done that to our laws in America.
Yeah, I mean, you also have to consider that we're a relatively new country too. I mean, the amount of time that we've had to make progress is rather small, but I subscribe to the living document theory that we should continue to work within the Constitution as a foundation and continue to advance that based on
Can you describe that theory just briefly?
Yeah, so it's a theory about the judicial system's philosophy on the Constitution, whether it's viewing the Constitution itself as a living document, so something that can be changed or viewing in perspective. We didn't have social media or cars or any of those things when the Constitution was written, so there's no way for them to have any laws about internet privacy or so many of the things that we're currently debating. So viewing the Constitution as a foundation that's a living document that can be applied rather than literally word for word what we should be continuing to use no matter what changes.
Aren't there certain, I know daylight savings times was created during the Industrial Revolution or something to save energy, right?
It was
based on approximations.
It was invented by Kaiser Wilhelm in Germany, and he was like, well, we're gonna save energy because we're gonna use our lights less or whatever,
heating and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think it actually saved any energy.
No,
and also,
didn't.
I remember listening to a talk by someone, and they mentioned that there are certain states where different counties practice. Some counties practice it, and some counties don't. I don't understand how that works. There must be so much confusion along with that.
I know that there's a county in Arizona where I think Arizona is not a daylight savings time state, and then within that there's an area that is, and then within that there's an area that isn't.
Oh my gosh, Inception, daylight savings Inception.
Yeah. I mean, that's just the way. That's just the way that it doesn't say in the Constitution who has the power to set the time.
Yeah.
Because time really wasn't a thing when that sounded really good.
Very philosophical.
Time didn't exist when the Constitution was written. But yeah, we didn't have a way of standardizing time at that time. So
so much time.
So it wasn't written whether it was a state's rights or a federal right, whether we should decide time. Yeah. The only reason it hasn't come up in the courts is because no one really cares. No one really cares enough to bring it up.
Yeah. Okay. So Grant and I want to bring it back to social justice movements a little bit. So going on a slight tangent.
I had actually kind of was thinking about a connection to what Will was saying.
Okay.
But I don't want to cut you off.
Oh no, go for it.
So you were saying how you don't think people should be. You don't think people should be obligated to or feel obligated to be informed, right? At least somewhat, at least.
Yeah.
So something that I feel like I've noticed is those people who maybe feel obligated to be informed, particularly with Trump being elected, then they go out and find a little nugget of information to support their point. So a lot of the people who were not supportive of the Women's March went and found that one of the speakers was served time in prison for murder and so she had something interesting in her history, and that's debatably relevant to the movement, but do you think that is at all related to people, kind of what you're saying, people feel obligated to feel informed, so they go find something to go support their point?
I mean, I think, first of all, the problem is that people think that there is a distinction between informed and not informed. If people feel that they really fully understand everything about an issue, that they're wrong. And so first of all is for those people to just take a minute and understand that they do not understand. And I do this routinely. I actually have a time where basically once a week where I basically just read stuff where I know I will not understand a single word of it. So that I kind of humble myself in that practice. So first of all, making sure that we all just understand that be a little bit more humble about where we are and our level of information about the world, and for that kind of thing, it's I fall prey to that all the time. There is a website called Economic Policy Institute, which sounds, very formal, professional. Oh, they're so smart. Economic policy, big words. But really what it is, it's just a left-wing labor economists, very pro-labor economists talking about issues that are pro-labor. So you can... So sometimes I do go on there in order to refute something I have heard from the other side. So I think that the two dangers in that, therefore, are number one, recognizing that there really is no other side, and this is kind of what Liza was talking about earlier. We're all working towards the same goal. We'll all have we all have basic human decency. We're all human, even Republicans. Number one, so there is no other side, and then also, and so therefore you shouldn't feel threatened if you find information that contradicts what you have in mind. And then number two, be more humble so that when you do find contradictory information, you don't rush to refute it. Instead of you incorporate it into what you already know instead of rushing to refute something that threatens you.
Go ahead.
But then you guys were talking about how some of these issues become two-sided, like oftentimes liberal versus conservative or something. And so in the case of the Women's March, a conservative might have gone and found this and then deemed the whole movement invalid, or the whole march invalid, because, and so I'm not at all trying to say you're wrong, I'm kind of agreeing with you, but yeah, I've noticed that a lot, that kind of what you're saying.
If I can piggyback on what you're saying, I think I feel very wary when I hear someone say that they're an expert on anything, especially when it's political. And I don't think what you're describing as, people choosing nuggets and using that as a foundation for confirmation bias, or using that as a story to completely refute a bigger concept or agenda or anything. I don't think that's a partisan issue. People do that on both sides and for every topic, whether it's political or anything. And that's just a simpler way that we've learned to process information. You read a headline, you assume that you know everything about the issue. Like Venezuela, you can't Google who's at fault in Venezuela and pretend to understand the concept or the crisis based on reading a few articles, because there's never just one side and there's never one actor. So on both of those issues, I think the only real solution is to understand that you'll never know the whole truth, and that everyone's truth is true for them. This is a little bit more like philosophical in my own personal philosophy, but I think, even the people who voted for Trump, they had, some of them, voted in defiance, and there's all of that, but a lot of them voted for genuine reasons. They genuinely believed that Trump would be the right answer and that he would genuinely fix the issues that they saw with America. They were the forgotten people, the people who, didn't feel represented. He was their knight in shining armor, and that's real, and that's a truth for them. And even if we don't agree with them, we can understand that that's a reality that they feel in their present situation. And when you say you're an expert on something, like I'm an expert on immigrant rights, I can't say that because I don't know the perspectives. I'm not a policeman. I don't know their perspective. I'm not undocumented. I don't know that perspective. So you can't say that you're a holistic expert on anything. And the only real solution to that is, like I was saying before, to surround yourself with as much opposing viewpoints or as many friends of different leanings as possible, because that way you'll hear the perspectives of people who really believe it to be true. And from that you can piece at least some shape of truth that's a little bit more than just your individual perspective.
I mean, I think that there is a little bit of danger in there, in that, like, this is Silicon Valley. We went 80% for Hillary Clinton. So first of all, I literally cannot find people who to disagree with me on like who we should have voted for, because like it's just so rare. And
I
so
know a person.
Yeah, no, I do too. Like I know some people, but like
I know
they're unicorns. Yeah. But if you go to a place where you'll find people to disagree with you, and like try to, as you say, like pursue that kind of holistic mindset. First of all, if you go in it with a positive attitude and a humble attitude, sure, it'll be fruitful. But the problem is, if you go in there trying to, like, with some sort of thing that's like, oh, this is worthless, oh, I'm not going to find anything, oh, I'm just going to have my own biases confirmed, which you will have kind of in the back of your brain probably, and you go to, say, Berkeley College Republicans, that's going to be kind of a nightmare, because groups like that are because they feel so much under threat, and because they feel like that a lot of their livelihood is kind of threatened, they just get very, very reactionary. Like, I walked around Berkeley campus the other day, and I was like, okay, I thought to myself, like, okay, what is it like if I were a Trump supporter? What would it like being here? I obviously can't put myself in his shoes because I despise Donald Trump, but I could really, really understand like how it might be just a kind of constant psychological like issue of just being on campus and
being really alienated.
Not being safe, not feeling safe. Like there are resist banners on campus. Yeah. There are people screaming about how Donald Trump is an awful person on one of the entrances to campus. And I can definitely see like why Berkeley College Republicans might not feel safe literally going to school.
And that's what I think is the most important aspect of becoming a global citizen or education, is just understanding those different perspectives. You don't need to know, like I was saying, like you don't need to know the policy, just of being aware that your perspective isn't the only one. And then even beyond that, like you were saying, to be humble about it. And when you're going into a situation like that, like you're going into the BCR room and you're saying that you're going to educate yourself, you're not coming there to change their perspective, you're coming there to learn about theirs. And maybe change something about your own perspective. It's the intention that you're going in for. When you're Googling an article, are you Googling it because you want to send it in some angry Facebook chat? Are you Googling it because you genuinely want to learn about the topic and be a little bit less ignorant about something? And being really aware of your intentions when you're saying something, or whether you're researching, or really anything, I think is key to becoming as close as possible to this holistic truth that I think we're all searching for.
Yeah, there's a book written a couple of years ago by this guy, Chris Clark, who's a historian, and he is another one of those books of like, why did World War I begin? And those are a dime a dozen. They're literally, if you tried to read all of them, it would take you thousands of years, not even exaggerating. But he said, wait, why am I trying to answer why did it begin? Because if you ask the question why, you immediately look for blame. So we decided to say, okay, I'm going to answer the question, how did World War I begin? So I think if you apply this similarly, if you ask yourself not why do people believe what they do, but instead how do they believe what they do, then I think that'll lead you on to a better mindset going into it.
Yeah. And you have to be aware that each of us have biases too. Like, the news that we read is biased, but we also have biases, whether in all aspects of policy or just worldviews. And and I think it's to one point it's biological. It's okay to have some sort of bias, but you have to be aware and you have to be constantly thinking that is the interaction I'm about to have guided by this air of bias that I have about the person I'm interacting with, and if so, what can I actionably do to maybe shift that a little bit or learn more? I mean, there's so many articles about people who were promoting prejudice against a certain group, and then they meet someone like Meet a Muslim and other programs like that, and that completely changes it shifts their paradigm, completely changes their experience of the entire culture or the entire religion that's millions of people, and you can really just shift that by meeting one person.
Yeah, have a Meet a Republican thing on campus.
Yeah.
I think though that like one of the most dangerous things about the current polarization is that it's becoming geographical. Like it's becoming rural versus urban, and if it's geographic, then it's very, very difficult for people just going out about their daily lives who don't really aren't as fully engaged in this as like you or I am. Like it's difficult for them to like actively seek out different perspectives if they have a lot of other crap to deal with, other stuff to worry about in their lives. So I think what's most dangerous is the fact that areas like this are becoming so much more polarized versus areas like Scranton, Ohio, or whatever. No, that's in Pennsylvania. Becoming so much more conservative that you simply do not have interactions with people who disagree with you, and I don't feel like there's honestly much in the way that private organizations can do to kind of solve that. It's much more of a structural issue.
So a question I've been thinking about that's kind of relevant to that, I want to hear your perspectives on. At what point does a community become an echo chamber? So on one side, you want to involve yourself with people who are similar to you. It's biological. You feel threatened by some people, and you're more likely to associate yourself with people who look and act like you, and that's just how it's always been, evolutionary. And you also want to confirm your own biases, and that's important to have a community, something that you relate to. But at what point does that community actually become harmful? I don't know.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
I mean, you want us to solve America right now? I think. I don't know. I don't know. I've never thought about that.
Or how do you balance it? I guess you're aware. Like I don't know. I grew up and I was in a Jewish youth group, and I know for a fact that all of the people in that Jewish youth group have very similar politics as I do about, well, maybe not about Israel, but about Judaism and left and all of that. And I'm aware of that. And I know that if I bring a topic to them, like, let's talk about Palestine today, I know the response that I will get in that group, and it feeds into my...
Yeah.
I had to very actively try to surround myself with other perspectives and be reading other news sources, because if I was only in that community, that's the only perspective I would have gotten. And
I mean, I feel like, honestly, this... okay, I think what might be useful is if people read the news a little bit less and, like, paid attention and, like, honestly just, like, kind of tuned out for a little bit. Just, like, kind of reorient themselves. And I'm trying to do this right now. Like, just reorient yourself, like, have a little bit of perspective on everything that's happening right now. Like, it seems like the end of the world. There's a lot of apocalyptic rhetoric coming out from Democrats. And just remember, like, we've had worse presidents, dare I say. Like, we've had Martin Van Buren. We've had James Buchanan. Like, those were terrible, terrible presidents. We've had a civil war where 2% of the American male population died. Like, that is far more toxic than anything we will see within the next 10 years, and we survived that. So, I mean, not whole, but we survived it. I mean, we've been through worse periods in American history. We've been through more polarized periods, and somehow we've come back together. So I feel like stepping out a little bit and just, like, putting everything in historical context will make you a little bit less, concerned with the immediacy of the situation. And when things become, like, an immediate threat to you, then you
act on emotion. You have
the emotional reaction. Yeah. You don't take a step back, and you don't approach things humbly.
And I mean, I think for you or people who really study history, it's easy to take that rational approach. But how comforting is that to someone who's so far removed? Like, I know that 2% of the people died, but I didn't know any of those people, and I'm not at all associated to that, and that's just a statistic for me. And how comforting is that to know that it's so far removed and nothing that I will actually be in any association with in my lifetime, and what's happening now is in front of me, and it's something that I experience. So it's just this detachment, and I mean, I think part of it is desensitization about war and death, but another part of it is just that it's so long ago and it's not relevant. Even if I know factually that, there's been worse things that have happened, it's hard to remove yourself from what's happening right now.
And there are plenty of immediate threats, too, that people do have to address. And I think it makes it extremely hard to act, rationally without, your emotions or your gut feelings, like pushing you to do certain things when there are those immediate threats. The banned 7 countries that Trump passed. Sure. I think that's definitely an immediate threat right there. Sure. There are people whose friends and families. I know a friend at MIT, a friend of a friend, they were back, with their family in the Middle East, and they couldn't come back.
Sure.
And the school literally had to pull some strings to get them back in the country. So those are very immediate threats. And, there are tons of outbursts that I saw shared from that community. And I think, and tons of, momentum building from that threat. And I think that is immediate. And, like, just... I
mean, when I saw the results coming in, I was sitting on my couch and I was with my dad, and my dad has been through the Nixon crisis. He's been through Vietnam. He was in most of the East Coast protests in Vietnam. He literally tear gassed his friends by accident. That's another story.
Oh my gosh.
Well, his friends' kids, but that's not better.
Oh my gosh, that's worse.
So he literally turned to me when it was announced that Donald Trump won, and he was like, "This is the worst thing I've ever seen." And he's a historian, He was like, this is. He was just so in such a state of shock. He was almost in tears. Well, we both were kind of in tears, but So I understand like the impulse and the immediacy and the emotional problem that Donald Trump faces. Like, he is honestly like there is a lot of legitimate there's a lot of legitimacy in the fear of immediate harm, because he is breaking norms left and right that have held this country together. He is creating a whole lot of policies that will make life worse for people if they're fully implemented. That's not like I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just saying like at the same time you need to have a little bit more of a awareness of the historical context and of just despite the fact that it is, an immediate threat, in order to kind of be a little bit more secure in yourself, I guess, just like kind of pull back and say, yes, this is happening, this is a problem, but we will get through it. Like it will be over. Just a little. That's true. I guess a little bit more stoicism.
I think I disagree with that. I think the reason that people are freaking out right now is because they have historical context. So to offer a different perspective, I was watching the election results with my mom. And my mom was a Soviet Jewish refugee, came here for political and religious freedom, sought asylum, as did the rest of my family. And as we were, as the results were pouring in, she started crying and she said, "This reminds me of the old country." And I was just, first of all, it's just such a heartbreaking statement because so many atrocities happened there. But I think the reason that we're so scared right now is because we see the parallels. We know that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, and that's not what's happening right now, and that there's not even at all comparison of, the danger. But the reason the Muslim ban is scary is because it reminds us of that, and it reminds us of things that we've already seen. And civil war, like we know 2% of the males died, and that's horrible, but the reason that we're scared now, or at least I feel like I'm scared, is because of that information, and because we know the drastic consequences that it can have.
I mean, I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I think what happened was that during the election there was a whole lot of rhetoric comparing Donald Trump to Hitler, and even if you'd say, if your reaction is, oh, obviously he's not Hitler, that's still in the back of your mind, and you're always kind of making that comparison. So, yes, I know a lot of people who had that similar reaction. I know some people who were from Russia and Germany, like, this is Nazi, this is fascism, this is totalitarianism. But I think the cause of that isn't necessarily the fact that it is, or it is comparable. It's more the way in which we think about it. So I think the fact that we think it in terms of totalitarianism itself makes us more likely to compare it to totalitarianism.
I mean, whether it is or not, the fact that it resembles it is the scary part.
I don't know that it does, though. I don't, because, I mean, I don't think that this is comparable. I think that Donald Trump is a horrible person and that he should not be... most of the stuff that he's done is unconstitutional and inhumane, but I don't think that it resembles even a lot of the policies that America itself has had in the past. Like, we did actually have a ban on certain countries in the past. In World War II, we refused to admit Jews into our country. We literally allowed Jews to die in the middle of the Atlantic because we were anti-Semitic at that point. So this isn't new to America. We've always been very deeply flawed. And yet there have also been other aspects of America that are also very, very positive. And I think if we focus a little bit more about the positive aspects, we'd maybe, put that in context.
Well, okay, so I had two thoughts about that. First of all, I guess that depends on how you define fascism and how you make those parallels, but that's a different discussion. Secondly, I think that we focus too much on America's positive. I think we're conditioned and grown up in this societal pressure to think that America is the best. We're number one. We have the best healthcare, the best education. Our pride, we're the number one country in the entire world. And that's not really the case. It might have been the case, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, or maybe even not then. But especially right now, there's so many other really good industrialized democracies that are at our level, if not better, in all forms of advancement. And we've conditioned ourselves in this little bubble to think that America is the best, and we're so prideful. And we have this disattachment that, forced sterilization of women in jails really wasn't outlawed that long ago. Japanese internment camps, colonies for epilepsy patients. These things happened within the last 30, 40 years. That's not new, but we've desensitized ourselves to that and conditioned ourselves to ignore that. I think whether it's an educational problem or a societal problem, I don't know, but I think we focus too much on America's positives and ignore all of those nasty things in our history to have this air of superiority, because that's the only way that we can still buy into this America is great. And if we all knew about those things, or if we all considered them every single day when we're putting up our flag, I think we'd be much less likely.
Well, I mean, I think that actually that's one of the problems is that, there is one of the reasons why Donald Trump was so successful is the whole "Make America Great Again" slogan. Like that sort of idea that America is no longer great. I think that comes from a lot of people on the left who are saying, "Look, America isn't so great," which I happen to agree with. I agree that America isn't so great, but I think that rhetoric of and again, I'm looking at how, not why, so I'm not looking at blame. I'm not blaming anybody. But I think that because that the left has started pointing out all of these really, really problematic pieces of American history, that is a threat to people who consider themselves true Americans who want to believe in this exceptionalism. So you can also blame the exceptionalism itself for kind of facilitating this virulent strain of pro-America nationalism that then, when it comes under threat, results in Donald Trump. So, I mean, that's just the way in which, how we talk about things or how we look at things, deeply influences kind of who we consider ourselves to be. And all I'm really saying is, what we need to do is we need to take a little bit of a step back, consider parts of American culture that don't have Donald Trump in them, increasingly rare as they are, and make sure that there are pieces of American life that are not corrupted by politics. I was deeply influenced by Stephen Colbert's monologue at the end of the election night, which I think everyone should go back and watch. His monologue was this is over, it was shit, I don't like it, this is terrifying, but you know what? When I was a kid, we didn't talk about politics 24/7. And what he noticed was that he just said, we were much happier back then. We were so much better off not talking about politics. And after Donald Trump was elected, you had Donald Trump news or statements invading the Oscars and basically covering all of American life. And I think that's completely unhealthy because it immediately polarizes and it immediately makes negative positive aspects of American culture or stuff that we all go to for a sense of community and a sense of commonality. So maybe tying back to your earlier question about when does a community become an echo chamber, it's more of a, what are the areas of common ground that we have in our broad American mass culture that we can all kind of agree on. And the more that politics influences that and gets into that, which it has done to a very large extent in my view, the less kind of cohesive and the more fragmented we are and the more polarized we become.
Yeah, but I think you also have to consider the state of our news now and how it was when Colbert was growing up, probably. We have our 24-hour news cycle. We have to have things flowing at all times. We have notifications. I probably have just 20 within this last hour. And it's this constant need for more extremism, more statements, and that's kind of how we feed off of it. And the more that happens, the more we need, and the more drastic of a headline we need to get our attention. And I think that's just going to, I don't know if there's a cap of that. Is there some sort of ceiling, or are we just going to keep going until we're, showing mass atrocities in all of their explicitity on television, which is already kind of happening? I don't know. It's a different arena now we're stepping into. And I also think it's good for society to take a step back from that. But also personally, I know that I've, when I see someone, when I'm driving down the highway and I see a Trump sticker, I feel uncomfortable around that car. Or even with people, it's become it's a defying point. You talk to someone, it's they mention Trump or they mention the Republican, automatic, you don't talk to them again. I mean, that's not how all people do, but sometimes.
It's very common.
Yeah, and it's become a part of our daily thinking. And I think, though that's important because there's things coming down and things you need to be aware of, there needs to be some sort of detachment from that. And also on a mental health note, there's this really interesting NPR piece right after the election about the productivity of people in offices post-Donald Trump election, and they're conducting some sort of survey. I don't know the methodology, but they were saying that it decreased because people were more depressed, more stressed out, spending more time at work reading the news than actually working. It's really invaded our daily thought and life. Mm-hmm. And on one end, I get that because there are a lot more things to be concerned about right now, I think, than in previous years, or at least more communities that need to be concerned. But on another note, for your own health and for society's health, I think there needs to be some sort of disattachment, or like safe hobbies or safe things that aren't political.
All right, I think we're actually running low on time, and my apologies for the camera going out midway through. But just on like an ending note, I want to give you guys both a chance to speak on a topic that we kind of touched on earlier. But so for someone, like I want to become more globally aware, more aware of these local issues. And we mentioned a lot of different ways to mitigate the biases and confirmation bias, and getting, two sides to the story. Will, you said like approach it with like a humble mindset. Like how do you guys recommend like getting out there and like becoming more aware? Like what specific publications do you guys read, or what methods, radio, podcasts, print, or the local papers do you guys use to get your inflow of news?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm not an expert at all on this, and I think it's a continuous process. So the first step is understanding that it's a process and that you'll never be an expert or you'll never be fully aware. And I think that's like an introspective process that you have to take with yourself, and like self-actualization and all of that. Second, I think surrounding yourself with people who you don't necessarily agree with, friends or news articles, online, in person.
So how do you even start like forming those opinions though, on these things, and like so what is your basis for those? Are you just digesting information without
No,
thinking?
I mean, everyone has latent opinions, and that's how you pick your party allegiance based on your parents' influence, whether you flip or everyone has their bias. And the first step is understand it's a journey, and you'll never be an expert. Understand that you have a bias, and then work actively to whether you want to correct that bias or understand other perspectives. So get those little pieces of information, little truths. Understand that each person has their own truth, and it's no more true. Your truth isn't more true than mine. We can be in the same room, experience the same situation, and come out with two completely different experiences, and that happens all the time. So try to find that as much as possible in all of your daily interactions, in your news, and anything, and use the foundation of skills that you have and apply that to different subjects, I think. And politically, I think personally I like reading as many different news articles as I can from different perspectives, because I find like even the rhetoric that they use, like when you see a news article and there's two different headlines from like, I don't know, The Blaze and Slate or something, it's completely different, and it paints a completely different image. But there's tidbits that both of those news publication sites include or exclude. So that's part of it. And depending on what you're interested in, going to events, hearing speakers, panels, just having discussions and meeting people, interacting with people as much as possible. I think that's really the only way, because everyone has their knowledge, and kind of get a little bit of knowledge from everyone.
Yeah. What was the question?
So how do you recommend like becoming more aware, I guess, and are there specific
Sure. Well, I think there are two issues mainly. Number one is like, how do you kind of retain perspective on an issue, and then number two, like, how do you actually go out and find information? For the second one, I think it's whatever you can to do to incorporate it into your daily routine would be great. If you and just kind of like remain curious, I'm always a fan of like people being curious about things, and just kind of let your reading take you wherever it takes you. Don't force yourself to read about something for the sake of being more informed if you don't give a crap. Like, that's not valuable to you. It's not valuable to society, honestly. So just go wherever your curiosity takes you, and if it takes you to Venezuela, find like a core group of like sources that you go to find out more about it. And so I would recommend probably Foreign Affairs magazine is a very, very good, reputable news organization. It has a very slight kind of pro-American point of view, obviously, because it's American. Brookings Institution is very good. It's slightly left of center, but it has views from both the left and the right. American Enterprise Institute would be the conservative alternative to Brookings. It's very, very free market. The Economist has a very, very good kind of well-balanced articles on most issues. They do have a very neoliberal perspective on almost everything, so just be aware of that. Then there's New York Times, BBC, Washington Post, all of the the standards. I think there is, though, a huge problem with paywalls. All of those things I just mentioned have paywalls. And so a lot of schools already have subscriptions for you. So if you're a student, go to the school and see what subscriptions they already have for you. I have no idea because I have my own, But I knew my high school had them. Yeah. And I literally just went up to the librarian and was like, hey, I'm part of the Foreign Policy Club. Can we get a subscription to Foreign Policy magazine? And they're like, sure, we'll do it. And they did it. I don't know if Foothill will do the same or who you would have to go to at Foothill, but that would be a way to do it. Other than that, in terms of how you approach news, again, always ask the how questions rather than the why questions, and always, be humble, look for information rather than opinions. Whenever you read something, then ask yourself, okay, what's the evidence to support this? Is he just spouting off at the mouth or whatever? Just because and don't take the reputability of certain news sources too seriously, because there's plenty of stuff in the opinion pages of both the New York Times and Washington Post that's just complete garbage on the left and the right. All of that is just, people who are already deemed smart and experts, who are just saying their opinions. You don't have to take that seriously and you don't have to read it. I never read the opinion pages of the New York Times because half of the stuff is garbage and it's hard to tell which half is good. So just keep that in mind as well. And also, 538 is also a very, very good news source because as a kind of a contrarian point of view, it's very much, again, whenever something is covered by the media in America, there is sort of a consensus that emerges, and 538, they do their best to kind of argue against that consensus. So those are just what I would recommend.
Okay, cool, yeah. I think we're going to wrap up this episode then. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
This has been Liza Turchinsky and Will Robertson, hosted by Grant Baum and myself, Sean McPherson. Cool. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys.